Welcome back to Toothbright. In this episode, we're going to talk about the individual tooth and tooth anatomy. The previous episode, we spoke about the overall adult dentition. As a reminder of the adult dentition, it consists of 32 teeth, okay, in the adult dentition. And those 32 teeth, we have 16 maxillary, right? And then we had 16 mandibular. Okay, 16 maxillary, 16 mandibular. Now, what did those consist of? If we recall, that consisted of different types of teeth. If we start in the middle, we have our central incisors. You have 2 of those. Okay, those are your very front teeth. Then you have your lateral incisors, and we have 2 of those, right? And you have on the bottom the same thing, just smaller, more delicate on the bottom. Okay, so these, remember, were incisors. And then what we had next to this was the cuspid. And the cuspid, remember, was the canine. It's called a cuspid because it has one cusp on there, okay? And you have that here. Those have very long roots. You have another one over here, okay? And one up here. Oop, not the best drawing, but we'll make it do. There we are, okay? And those are the canine or cuspid, because it has one cusp. Okay, and then next to those we found the bicuspid or the premolar, right? And they had the first premolar, and then you have a second premolar right there, and it's the same way all the way around. Another one down here, another 2 down there, 1, 2, first and second, and we label from the front to the back. Okay, and another one here. First and second. And those are now your cuspids in the middle, remember? And these are your premolars that are behind the canines, premolars, or they are your bicuspid, right? Because we have 2 cusps, bicuspid. 1 cusp, 2 cusps. Okay. And then the final tooth that we talk about here are the molars. And the molars, there's 3 on each side, and top and bottom. So 1, right? That's the first molar, and just like the premolars, they're labeled front to back, first, second, third. This is your second, and this would be your third molar. Okay, and the same thing down here, just a little variation of root anatomy again. Boom, boom. Your first, your second, and then you have a third molar right here, third. Okay, and the same thing on the here, first, second, third, first, second, third. Now these third molars, they're special teeth, right? That's a third molar. They are your wisdom teeth, if you remember. Wisdom tooth, okay? And you have 4 of them. You have 1 here, right? You have 1 down here. And then on the other side, 1 and 1. So 4 wisdom teeth. And those are the teeth you generally get extracted, okay? Because our mandible is often too small to accommodate them. So now let's look individually at these teeth. Let's look at what makes up the structure of a tooth itself. Okay, and this is just a very basic descriptor. You have the crown, which is the portion above the gum tissue that we see. Okay, so this is what we call the crown. An easy way to remember that it's called the crown is because if you think of a crown, right? Boom. The crown sits on top, right, of the head. Just like the tooth sits on top of the root. Okay, so here you go. And we'll give you a little smiley face there. Okay, so this is a crown. All right. And then the crown, okay, if you think of the crown, it has a very thick outer layer, okay, called the enamel. So right here, this portion of the crown, okay, that's called the enamel. So the enamel is that very hard surface on the outside that's white, okay? And inside that, there's a surface that the enamel protects, okay? And that's the dentin layer. And the dentin goes all the way up the tooth, okay? And it forms this inside area. Okay, the dentin. It's a softer substance than the enamel, okay? Much more porous, much more susceptible to a cavity. If you get a cavity inside the tooth, this substance will be destroyed very quickly. Okay, and that's the dentin. That's inside. All right, and then inside the dentin itself is the area that we're always concerned about, and that is the pulp. Okay, the pulp. All right. And the pulp consists of nerves and blood vessels. So your dentist will often not just refer to it as the nerve in the tooth, even though oftentimes that's what you'll hear outside of dentistry, but they may say call it the pulp. Call it the pulp because it's a gelatinous, fibrous type tissue that consists microscopically of individual blood vessels and nerves. And that originates outside the tooth, right? And goes in these little holes on the bottom of the tooth here, okay? And occupies the centermost aspect of the tooth, right in here. This is where the pulp is. Okay. So the pulp is what your tooth is protecting. Now, why do we have the pulp? Why do we need the pulp? Well, it helps us in the respect of being able to sense hot and cold and know when there's damage being done to the tooth. But the main purpose of the pulp was just to provide a pathway for the cells to come in and be able to build the tooth when you very first got the tooth. All right. So all the cells having to do with the development of the tooth originated inside the pulp. So once you're an adult, if you have damage to the pulp and the tooth is fully developed, then the treatment for that is to remove the pulp because you can think of it as just a remnant of development. Okay. The final aspect of a tooth is the protective layer of the root. Now the root needs to be protected also, and the root is mainly dentin, right, without enamel, so it has a protective layer on top of it that's very intimate. It's connected to it. It's despite the fact I'm leaving a gap, there's no gap. It's called the cementum. Okay, and that goes all the way around the root. Okay, this, and that's the protective layer of the root. It's very important if there's ever trauma to the tooth. That's where the cementum comes into play. The cementum wants to protect the tooth. You don't want damage to the cementum during trauma. Okay, but that's the protective, thin protective layer that goes around the root. Okay, and the root, of course, I didn't label it here, but that was the green right here, the root. Okay, so there you have it. This is the basic anatomy of a tooth. It consists of the outer crown portion, the inner root portion that sits in the bone. The crown has the protective enamel, hard enamel on the outside that protects the inside dentin, and then inside that is the pulp, and the root is soft dentin-like substance, and it has the protective layer, the cementum around it. An easy way to remember a tooth is to think of peanut M&Ms. Okay, so I like the green M&M, so let's draw a green peanut M&M here. Very thin candy shell, right? Inside that thin candy shell, you have the chocolate, right? All the chocolate here. All this is that chocolate. And then inside there, you have the nut, right? The peanut right on the inside. So if you get damage to that outer candy shell, which is much like the enamel of the tooth. All right, you can remember, you pop a couple of these in your mouth. If you can try to preserve that candy shell, but as soon as that candy shell is gone, that chocolate dissolves. It's the same thing in a tooth. As soon as you get through that enamel with a cavity, so you have the tooth right over here. Oh, give me some yellow here. You have the tooth, right? It's got that protective enamel in there. Right. As soon as you get a little hole in that, okay, and it gets into the dentin underneath, gets into any of this this dentin that's underneath there, into this area right here, gets into there, it will get to that nerve tissue very quickly. That's why it's very important. Get right in there because that's soft. That's why it's very important we really do everything in our power to protect this outer layer of enamel. All right, so if you have any questions, eventually we'll have a place for comments as well as email address. You can email any questions, suggestions. But until then, thank you for watching. We really appreciate you checking into the channel. Hopefully this gave you a bunch of good knowledge and it's going to allow you to increase your oral health and maintain your oral health moving forward. So from the folks over here at Toothbright, we appreciate everything and we wish you a wonderful day.